Hi everybody and welcome to Heel Heat. My name is George Coles, and on this episode, we're doing Who Was Better. The topic for this Who Was Better? The Outsiders. Scott Hall, Kevin Nash. If you haven't seen any of my Who Was Better videos previously, what we're going to do here, we have 8 categories. Each category has a 1 to 5 scale, 1 being the worst, 5 being the best. At the end of the categories, we're going to total up their full points from each one, see who ends up being statistically better. There is a chance for bonus points that we'll talk about when we get there. With that being said, let's jump right in with our first category, technical ability. Now this is your technical wrestling, basically think someone like Bret Hart, Kurt Angle, Dean Malenko, guys of that ilk. For this, we're going to start off with Scott Hall. I'm giving Scott a 4. I think Scott is underrated here. When you list the greatest technical wrestlers of all time, you don't necessarily bring him up on that list. But when you go through, especially his career, and you talk about the guys that are on that list, guys like Michaels and Bret Hart, you find that he's a common opponent with these guys. And he also meshes well with so many different wrestlers that I think it gives him that bit of an edge. Now for Kevin Nash, we're going to give Big Kev a 3. I don't want to say Kevin's bad, because he's not. Kevin wrestled a very smart style for his size, especially for the era. It could be argued that he's one of the first big men that really started implementing a bit of a work rate into their wrestling. And what I mean by that is if you look at prior to the Diesel gimmick, prior to Kevin Nash turning Diesel, you look at guys like Andre the Giant, Big John Studd, and this is not a knock on them. There was a very specific way that giants or really big men worked. Then you look at post-Nash, like guys like him, Sid Vicious, Undertaker at some point, kind of evolved that style. And while Kevin Nash, you would never say was on a Kurt Angle level, he wasn't bad. He was good. He wrestled his style. He helped evolve the style of a big man. So for that, I'm giving him a 3. Next up, striking. This is your basic clotheslines, kicks, drop kicks, all that fun stuff. A strike. For Scott Hall, Scott's going to get a 4. I think Scott's really good at this. I do think there is a minor deficiency in his punches. He had, at times, his punches looked a little bit weak, a little bit fake, if lack of a better word. And it kind of hurts him a bit here, but he's still absolutely excellent at it. For Nash, Nash is getting a 5. When you think of Kevin Nash, you think of his 5 moves of doom, and you think of the big boot, you think of the elbow in the corner, you think about the clotheslines he throws, and they all look pretty vicious, especially the big boot. Sidebar here, a little bit of a tangent. For you guys that are old enough to remember WCW NWO Revenge, do you remember when you would kick with Kevin's big boot and it would just knock wrestlers out? You would get a KO win from that? That was so cool. That thought just popped in my head. I used to do that all the time. When I play the game to this day, it's a game I go back to more. I go back to it more than No Mercy because, honestly, I like the roster a little bit better. And yes, I know No Mercy and WrestleMania 2000, they have great rosters as well. But there's something about the WCW NWO Revenge game that I go back to more than the other two. But anyway, I'm going off on a tangent here. Just goes to show how powerful his striking was and how revered it was that in the game, his big boot, which isn't even a finisher, is given that much of a power. Now going from that, our next category, how they perform as a heel. For Scott, I'm giving Scott a 5. I mean, everything from his Razor Ramon character to the NWO, being there for one of the greatest heel turns in wrestling, one of the greatest storylines in wrestling, being the first guy to jump the barricade to start the NWO. How can you grade him anything other than a 5 here? Which leads us right into Kevin Nash, Big Kev. He's getting a 5 as well. Again, from his work as Diesel, as the bodyguard, to the NWO stuff, you can't really talk about the history of WCW or the history of wrestling in the 90s without bringing up both of these guys. And both of them worked so well as heels that they basically changed the fortunes of a company. The NWO is just as important as every documentary says it is. It's just as groundbreaking as everybody that says it was. If you weren't there at the time, it literally was one of the biggest things in the history of wrestling. Imagine, for instance, a 2013 John Cena turning heel and joining up with 2 guys from I don't know, I guess TNA would be the competitor at that time, and how big of an impact that would make. And that's kind of what we're talking about here. Both of them were excellent here. Both of them get 5s. Next up, how they perform as a babyface. For Scott Hall, Scott's getting a 5. Again, Scott Hall might be the most underrated but well-known underrated wrestler of all time. Everybody knows he was underrated. Everybody knows he should have been better than what he was. Everybody knows he should have had a better spot than what he did. And when he was a babyface, especially in the Razor Ramon character, you just loved him. I mean, it was hard not to love the guy. He was that good at what he did. And he didn't switch his style, which a lot of what makes a great face to heel turn or a heel to face turn is you don't necessarily switch what you're doing. You just switch who you're doing it against. So that made a lot of sense for him. Just a great baby face. For Kevin Nash, Diesel's going to get a 4 here. And the reason being, and I hate to hark on this because a lot of people do, I don't really think it's all his fault, but his run as the face champion Diesel kind of feels like the pre-bloodline run of Roman Reigns as a champion, where it's like, okay, you're forcing this guy down our throats. Yeah, he's good, but we don't really want him to be champion. At the time, there's an argument that could have been made that more people wanted Scott Hall to be champion, or Michaels, or Bret Hart, or there were just people that didn't give a crap about the company because we were right in the middle of the new generation era, which brought in a lot of stuff like Duke the Dumpster Droese, Bastion Booger, Sparky Plug, all these stupid, silly gimmicks that got put on the mostly pretty decent wrestlers. But even with that, even taking out of context, I just don't think he was ever super comfortable during that run. So I do give him a 4 because I think later runs as a face, he was much better. Just that run as Diesel as a face gives him a little bit of a step back. Now going from that, our next category, promos. This one's easy. They're both getting a 5. I mean, there's going to be people that say that Kevin Nash wasn't a great promo, but he had that ability. And Scott too, both of these guys. They came across, especially during their NWO run, they came across as so personable, so understandable. They came across real in a world that was very cartoony. I mean, think about it. Like I just said with Duke Dumpster Droese and those guys, and at WCW, you got the Dungeon of Doom and stuff of that nature. And here you have these guys that are coming out. I'm Scott Hall and Kevin Nash, seeming like how they would be in real. Like I said, they're both getting 5s for this. I can't see giving them anything other than that. Next category, presentation. This is basically your Titantron, your gear, your ring wear, your ring attire, stuff of that nature. For this, I'm giving Scott Hall a 5. I really loved everything about it, from the theme song he had as Razor Ramon to the NWO song, which is fantastic. His presentation fit him so well. It was simple but effective. All he needed was a vest, some gold chains, a toothpick, and you just immediately bought him. It made so much sense for him. He gets a 5. For Diesel, Kevin Nash, Kev's getting a 4. And the reason why I mark him a little bit lower than Scott is because even though Diesel did get the special entrances, he did have very memorable ring gear. When I look at it on a level, I look at like the iconic Scott Hall trunks with the razors on them, or the NWO blood drips on them, and I think about Diesel and his singlet, which is iconic. There's just a difference. There's a little bit of difference between the two. So Kev gets a 4. It's really good. I just think Scott a little bit better in this category. Next category, charisma. This one's probably the easiest one to gauge on here. Both these guys are getting a 5. There is a reason why the NWO worked, and it worked so well. Both of these guys' charisma was off the charts. If you did a list of the top 10 most charismatic wrestlers of all time, I would say that both of these guys are on that list. And I know when you're hearing me, a lot of people think of Nash a little polarizing, especially now with his podcast. He has some quote-unquote hot takes. But if you really go back and you look and you listen to him in the NWO cutting the 8-minute promos, or even as Diesel, listen to the Diesel promo. I forget which In Your House it is, but it's him and Bret Hart are going to be the main event, and they're in a picture-in-picture promo, both side by side. And Nash is just being himself. He says something totally off the cuff and breaks breaks Bret Hart. Bret Hart starts giggling. You could tell he's visually laughing at the guy because he's so charismatic. To me, both these guys are a solid 5. Like I said, 2 of the most charismatic wrestlers of all time. They're the reason the NWO works so well. That's why they both get a high score. Now, our last category, big game performers. Basically, this is your Monday Nitro main event, your Starrcade main event, your WrestleMania main event, your high-profile matches. When it comes to being the face of the company or being the one that's out there tasked with bringing people in, how do they perform? How do they do when in these big pressure situations? First up, for Scott Hall, Scott's getting a 5. I mean, you could go down the list. Whether as a team, the Outsiders versus the Harlem Heat, or his rivalry with Shawn Michaels, or his matches with the 1-2-3 Kid, Scott Hall always seemed to be a level above almost everybody else in pro wrestling. And when given the big opportunities, the ladder matches, all of that stuff, he really put it on. Now, did he have a chance to be in the main events as much as Kevin? Unfortunately, no. But when he was given the shot, when he was given the big spotlight, he shined. Now, going to Kevin Nash, I'm giving Kevin a 4. And the reason why Kevin doesn't get a 5 is when you do think about it, and unfortunately a lot of it's not Kevin's fault. You think of some of his rivalries and some of the more memorable ones, like Mabel or even the Giant in WCW, aka Big Show. They're a bit on the lackluster side. And like I said, it's not always Kevin's fault, it's not always Nash's fault. Some of it's just the guy he's across the ring from. But because a lot of those things are in high profile matches, I gotta knock him down just a little bit. That's why Kevin's getting a 4 here. Now it's time for our totals. Let's see who got the most points. Scott Hall first off. He has a total of 38, which is a really, really high score. Like I said, probably the greatest wrestler to never be a world champion. One of the greats of all time, in my opinion. Next up, Kevin Nash. His total score, 35. Now with that, there is a chance for bonus points here. If you've been watching these or if you follow my channel, you'll know that every Wednesday I put out a poll, basically with what I'm going to do for the next Who Was Better video. I give you the 2 options or however many options there may be, and I let you guys vote on that. So the winner of that gets a bonus of 5 points. As you can see with this, that 5 points could swing the vote. For this case, it doesn't affect it. That bonus 5 goes to Scott Hall, giving him a total of 43 with the bonus, thus solidifying his win. I kind of felt it would go this way. I think it's a little bit closer than what most people would think, especially with the fact that Kevin Nash was more of a main eventer than Scott Hall was. It gives him a slight edge in some areas where Scott has other edges. I do think you can't think of one without the other. Both of these guys are 2 of the reasons why wrestling was so hot in the late 90s, why the Monday Night War was even a thing. I mean, these are 2 of the greats of that decade. Scott Hall, he is a winner in this case. And this is a point where I normally give a spoiler on what I'm going to do next week. I haven't exactly decided yet, so I will give you that. I haven't come up with a spoiler for the next video yet. I don't know who I'm going to do it on. I'd like to keep doing people that I haven't done before. I mean, obviously I could go back and do like we did Shawn Michaels versus Bret Hart. We could do Shawn Michaels versus somebody else, but I'd like to keep it different because basically he's going to get the same score. So it makes it a little bit anticlimactic. So I got to really look at that. I want to keep it where it's people that are tied either through a rivalry or in this case we're partners, or for some other reason they're tied together. So let me know if you have an idea of something you would like to see. Put it down here in the comments. While you're there, smash the like button, subscribe if you haven't, ding the bell, all that fun stuff that YouTubers tell you to do. It really does help us out. That's why we bring it up on every video you watch. And stay tuned to my community page on the YouTube channel. On Wednesday, I am going to definitely drop who will be the next week's participants, so you can vote on that again. This time we had over 600 votes, which, again, thank you very much. I love that much interaction. With all that being said, my name is George Coles, and you've been watching Who Was Better.